There comes a moment in every individual's life when the noise of the outer world begins to clash violently with the whisper of the inner world. For most, this moment is suppressed, delayed, drowned in duties, distractions, and relationships that no longer serve the soul. But to those few who listen, truly listen, a transformation begins. To withdraw is not to escape, it is to return. When you stop being constantly available to the expectations of others, to the unending demands of the social mask, and to the compulsive need to please, you begin to confront yourself. Not the self of polite conversation or curated identity, but the raw, unmediated self that has long waited in the shadow. You see, we live in a time where being available is mistaken for being valuable. Our worth, it seems, is now measured by our responsiveness, how quickly we reply, how frequently we show up, how easily we bend. But in truth, such constant availability is a subtle betrayal not only of our time, but of our soul. It is a denial of the individuation process, the unique journey of becoming whole. Every yes that comes from fear is a no to your becoming. Every role you maintain for approval is a shadow you must eventually integrate. When you stop being available to everyone, everything changes, not because the world suddenly turns against you, but because you begin to see clearly who respects your boundaries, who only valued your compliance, and who projected their own emptiness onto your presence. There is a reason Jung spoke so deeply of the shadow, the anima, the animus, and the collective unconscious. We are not free until we face the contents of our unconscious, and we cannot face them until we have the solitude and silence necessary to hear them speak. Solitude is not loneliness, it is courtship with the soul. When you begin to say no, not with resentment, but with rootedness, you make space for the archetypes within you to emerge. The wise old man, the divine child, the magician, the hermit. They do not appear in noise. They arrive when you become unavailable to what distracts you from yourself. The psyche does not blossom under constant exposure. Like a seed, it must first go underground. So I say, withdraw not as a punishment to others, but as an offering to your own becoming. This is not selfish, it is sacred, because when you return, you will not return as a fragmented mask, but as an integrated being. And that changes everything. In the modern world, the lines between availability and value have become dangerously blurred. We are conditioned from early childhood through school, work, and relationships to believe that the more accessible we are, the more useful, loved, and important we must be. In this paradigm, to be unavailable is seen as selfish, cold, or even arrogant. But this belief is not just a social misunderstanding, it is a psychological distortion, one that alienates us from the deeper truth of the self. Carl Jung taught that our lives are not to be spent in conformity with collective ideals, but in service of inner wholeness. Yet, collective society rewards conformity, and in this conformity, availability becomes currency. How fast you respond, how quickly you bend, how seldom you say no. But responsiveness, Jung would say, is not the measure of a soul's depth. In fact, those who are perpetually available to others often lose access to themselves. They become estranged from their own unconscious, trapped in roles and personas, what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear to adapt to the outer world. This mask is not inherently false, it is necessary for social survival. But when we equate our worth with the maintenance of this mask, especially through overavailability, we begin to shrink inwardly. We sacrifice our instincts, our desires, and our silence and replace them with constant engagement. The phone must be answered, the message must be replied to, the presence must be maintained, but at what cost? True psychological value is not found in how much we give away, but in how deeply we are rooted in ourselves. The individual who withdraws from constant availability does not diminish their value, they protect it. Because it is only in withdrawal, in selective engagement, that we remember, we are not here to please everyone, we are here to become whole. Being constantly available often comes from fear of rejection, abandonment, or of not being needed. But such fear is the domain of the wounded child archetype. the part of us that still seeks unconditional approval from the outside world. As long as we remain entrapped in this fear, our availability is not an act of love, but of desperation. We become useful instead of meaningful. When you begin to separate your availability from your value, a transformation takes place. You start asking, "Who am I when I am not performing? Who am I when no one is watching, needing, or calling?" In this silence, the self begins to speak. So let us make this distinction clear and sacred. Your value lies not in your availability to others, but in your availability to your inner life. The person who is no longer always accessible becomes rare, and in that rarity, they begin to radiate depth, autonomy, and quiet power. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you finally become something real to yourself. To withdraw from the world is not to escape it. Rather, it is the beginning of seeing it clearly. The moment you begin to reclaim your attention, the moment you step away from the constant noise, the endless affirmations of others, the roles you've been assigned, a profound internal process begins. Jung called this the path of individuation, the unfolding of the self from the fragments of the conditioned personality, and this unfolding requires solitude. The human psyche is not designed for relentless outward orientation. When we are constantly engaged, responding, adapting, performing, we are operating at the level of the ego, the surface layer of the psyche that is built for survival and interaction. But beneath the ego lies the unconscious, vast and rich, where the roots of meaning, purpose, and transformation grow. Individuation cannot occur in noise. It requires stillness, a conscious pulling away from the world so that the unconscious can rise and speak. This is why withdrawal is not regression. It is initiation. When you stop being endlessly available, you create space for the unknown within you to emerge. You create conditions for dreams to become louder, for synchronicities to appear, for long, suppressed instincts to awaken. You begin to notice how much of your life was lived not from freedom, but from habit, how often your yes was fear-driven, your obligations inherited, your identity shaped more by survival than sincerity. The process of individuation is not romantic. It is disorienting, often painful, because to become whole, you must confront everything that is not truly you, every false self, every internalized voice, every persona you've worn to be loved or accepted. These masks must fall away, and they do so not through more engagement, but through conscious separation. This is why so few people walk the path of true psychological growth. To withdraw is to lose social currency, to disappoint others, to sit in the discomfort of your own inner contradictions. It is to meet the shadow, the parts of yourself that you've denied or disowned. But in this confrontation lies your becoming, because what you do not bring to consciousness, Jung said, appears in your life as fate. So when you become less available to the outer world, you become more available to the inner one. You stop being reactive and start becoming reflective. You stop running and begin returning, and in this return you discover something that was never lost, only buried: your authentic self. Individuation is not about isolation, but integration. But integration requires separation first. You must leave the crowd to find your own voice. You must stop being everything to others in order to become anything at all. This is the paradox of transformation, that in distancing yourself from the world, you begin to belong to it in a new way, not as a performer, but as a whole human being. When you begin to withdraw from the external world to retreat from constant availability, you do not merely gain peace and quiet. You enter into a confrontation with the most avoided dimension of the human psyche, the shadow. This is not the darkness of evil, but the darkness of the unknown, the parts of yourself that have been rejected, suppressed, or never developed because they did not fit the image you were taught to present. The shadow is everything you are, but have not yet owned, and it lives in the silence beneath your social life, beneath your obligations and distractions. When you are always available to others, always entangled in roles, it is easy to avoid this confrontation. Your busyness becomes a hiding place. You never have to face the inner conflict, the envy you deny, the anger you repress, the desires you disown. But when you stop, when the noise settles, the shadow emerges. And it demands to be seen. Jung understood that wholeness is not found in becoming good, according to societal standards. It is found in becoming conscious of both your light and your dark, your nobility and your pettiness, your kindness and your cruelty, your strength and your fragility. All of it is you, and until you make peace with your shadow, it will control your life from behind the curtain. The problem is that most people mistake withdrawal for weakness. In reality, it is the beginning of profound inner strength. Because to face your shadow, to look directly at the parts of yourself you were taught to hate or fear, is an act of tremendous courage, and it cannot be done while performing for the world. It requires stepping back, disconnecting, and creating space where the unconscious can rise. This is why withdrawal is not passive. It is active inner work. It is the terrain of transformation. You begin to notice your projections, how you attribute your disowned qualities to others. You begin to see how your judgments, resentments, and attachments reflect what is unresolved within. This is not always pleasant, but it is necessary, because only what is brought to awareness can be transformed. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your unlived life. It holds your creativity, your passion, your intuition, your power, everything that was exiled when you conformed to survive. But these gifts return only when you stop being constantly available to everything outside you. You must become still enough to hear the voice that speaks from the depths. So when everything becomes quiet and the shadow begins to speak, do not turn away. Listen, let it show you what you've lost in your effort to be liked. Let it show you what is true beneath the mask, because in integrating your shadow, you do not become perfect, you become whole, and that is what the world truly needs, not more obedient personas, but integrated souls. There is a quiet kind of power in the word no, not the aggressive, defiant kind, but the grounded, conscious no, that arises from deep self-knowledge. This word, when spoken not from fear or rebellion, but from inner alignment, becomes a boundary. A boundary is not a wall to keep others out. It is a doorway to protect what is sacred within. In a culture that rewards self-sacrifice and labels boundaries as selfishness, many grow up equating love with self-erasure. To be loved, we think we must be endlessly available, agreeable, accommodating, always saying yes. But this compliance is not virtue. It is often trauma wearing a mask. It is the child in us still afraid that saying no will lead to rejection, punishment, or abandonment. Jung understood that to grow psychologically is to stop living from this wounded place, and that means reclaiming the right to say no. Because every time we abandon ourselves to please someone else, we fracture. We reinforce the false self, the persona built for survival but unfit for authenticity. And the more we do this, the more resentful, exhausted, and lost we become, not because others are demanding too much, but because we are refusing to protect the self. The psyche longs for integration, not sacrifice, and integration requires clarity, the ability to discern what is ours to carry and what is not. Saying no becomes a sacred act when it is used to guard our time, our energy, our values, and our inner work. It is not a rejection of others, but a commitment to ourselves. But this is not easy. Many fear the consequences of boundary setting. We fear we will be misunderstood, disliked, or even abandoned. And sometimes we will be. But what is lost in setting a boundary is nothing compared to what is lost in living without them. Our dignity, our truth, and our psychological wholeness. To say no is to return authority to the self. It is to claim your life as your own, no longer a commodity to be traded for approval. Jung believed that freedom does not come from doing whatever you want, it comes from choosing what serves your individuation, what aligns with your deeper being. Boundaries are the structure within which this freedom is possible. Over time, those around you will begin to feel the shift. You are no longer easy to reach, not out of hostility, but because you are now rooted. You are no longer available for manipulation, guilt, or unconscious obligation. Your presence becomes deliberate, not reactive, and this changes everything. So let the word no not be a weapon, but a compass. Let it guide you back to the center of your being, because every time you say no to what diminishes you, you say yes to what you truly are. When you stop being constantly available, when your presence is no longer something others can assume or consume, something remarkable begins to happen not just within you, but around you. Your relationships begin to shift. Not because you've become distant or cold, but because the dynamics that once defined your connections can no longer sustain themselves in the absence of your old patterns. You see, much of what we call relationship is not truly mutual, it is transactional. Often, the roles we play in others' lives are shaped more by their needs than by our truth. You become the helper, the rescuer, the listener, the one who never says no. And in return, you are given a temporary sense of value. But this value is conditional. It depends on your continued availability. Withdraw it, and you'll quickly discover which connections were rooted in love and which were rooted in need, control, or unconscious projection. Jung would say that this is the moment when the mask begins to fall, not just your own, but the masks of those around you. Because when you stop being who they needed you to be, their expectations crack. And in that crack, something deeper is revealed. Some will pull away, some will become angry or confused, but others, the ones who truly see you, will remain. They will adjust, they will grow with you. And these are the relationships that are worth keeping. True relationship is not built on availability. It is built on authenticity. It does not demand your constant presence, only your real one. But this kind of honesty is only possible when you stop giving from a place of compulsion. When you no longer feel responsible for managing others' emotions or maintaining peace at the cost of your own integrity. You invite the possibility of real connection, one where both people are allowed to be whole, flawed, and free. And yes, there is loss, there is grief in this process, because as your inner world transforms, your outer world must reorganize. Some bonds will break, others will be tested, but what remains is gold not in quantity, but in quality. You begin to surround yourself not with those who need something from you, but with those who see you, who respect your space, who are willing to meet you as equals on the path of becoming. This is one of individuation's harshest gifts. It purifies your connections. It reveals where love was real and where it was a role. And while this revelation can be painful, it is necessary, because you cannot truly belong to others until you first belong to yourself. So when the world seems quieter, when certain voices fade and certain faces disappear, know that this is not rejection, it is refinement. And in that silence, what is real begins to speak. There are dimensions within you that lie dormant not because they are lifeless, but because the world you inhabit rarely invites them to awaken. In the noise of daily life, in the roles you perform and the personas you wear, the deeper aspects of your psyche remain veiled. But when you stop being constantly available to everything outside of you, when you step away from the distractions, obligations, and performative masks, something ancient and powerful begins to stir. Jung understood that beneath the personal unconscious lies the collective unconscious, a vast reservoir of shared human experience that expresses itself through archetypes. These archetypes are not abstract ideas. They are living forces within the psyche, patterns of instinct, intuition, and mythic resonance, and they cannot be accessed through logic or routine. They appear in dreams, symbols, fantasies, and moments of profound solitude. To encounter an archetype is to feel as though you are not just one person living one life, but part of something far older, deeper, and more mysterious. The wise old man, the divine child, the magician, the shadow, the lover, the warrior, the hermit. These are not roles you choose. They are patterns that unfold when the ego loosens its grip, when the noise fades, and when your soul finally has room to breathe. But these archetypal energies do not emerge when you're endlessly available to the expectations of others. They require psychic space. They require a withdrawal from distraction, even from comfort. When you are always plugged in, always tending to the outer world, these inner figures remain locked away. It is in silence, in solitude, in stillness that they begin to appear not as hallucinations, but as truths rising from the depths of the unconscious. And with them comes meaning. Modern life often feels empty not because it lacks stimulation, but because it lacks symbolic depth. We starve not for experience, but for resonance. When archetypes awaken within you, even the smallest acts begin to feel sacred. A walk becomes a pilgrimage, a dream becomes a revelation, a conversation becomes a mirror. Life ceases to be linear and starts to feel mythic. But this is not a fantasy. This is psychological reality. These archetypes do not control you, they guide you. They show you which aspects of yourself are being denied, which chapter of your life is unfolding, which inner force is asking to be honored, and to ignore them is to live without soul. The process of individuation, the becoming of the true self, cannot happen without the emergence of these inner figures. And their emergence cannot happen without withdrawal, without unavailability, without the sacred refusal to remain entangled in the superficial. So when you step back from the world and the archetypes begin to rise, do not be afraid. You are not going mad. You are remembering something you were never taught, that you are not just a person in history, but a soul in eternity. There is a fundamental difference between returning to the world and re-entering it as who you once were. When most people take a break, a vacation, a digital detox, a brief step away, they often return as the same version of themselves that left, wearing the same mask, reenacting the same patterns, plugged back into the same roles. But when you step away consciously, when you stop being available not to escape, but to transform, your return is not a continuation. It is a rebirth. Jung taught that the goal of life is not adaptation to society, but the realization of the self. The self is not the ego. It is the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, known and mysterious. And when you have spent time in withdrawal, not just externally, but inwardly, you begin to realign with that deeper truth. You strip away what was never yours. You face the pieces of yourself you've long avoided. You listen to the voice within that has no interest in performance, only in wholeness. When you return after that kind of inner work, you no longer fit where you once did. The mask you used to wear feels tight. The scripts you used to follow no longer make sense. People may expect the old you, the constantly available, ever accommodating, agreeable version, but that person has dissolved. In their place stands someone quieter, perhaps, but more solid, less reactive, more real. You no longer say yes to gain approval. You say it only when it resonates with your truth. You are no longer drawn into every conflict, every invitation, every request. You choose deliberately. Your energy has become sacred, your presence intentional. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. You are no longer trying to be liked, you are living in accordance with your inner law. Jung called this the transcendent function, the integration of opposites within the psyche that gives rise to a new way of being. And that way of being is not fragmented or borrowed, it is uniquely yours. The world may not immediately understand this new you. Some will try to pull you back into old roles. Others may question your distance, your boundaries, your silence. But you no longer live by their scripts. You have become sovereign. This is the quiet revolution of individuation. Not that you shout your truth, but that you embody it. You walk differently. You speak differently. Even your absence begins to carry weight. And that presence, calm, self-contained, authentic, begins to shift everything around you. Not by force, but by vibration. You no longer return as a servant to expectation, but as a steward of your own soul. And that changes everything.